Professorial Inaugural Lectures. So let me welcome everybody here, and in welcoming you, let me also acknowledge the Bejigal people, the traditional owners of the land on which the university stands, and to pay my respects to their elders, both past and present, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who may be here today. So at today's lecture, we will hear from Professor Julie Cogin, who is Director of the AGSM, the Australian Graduate School of Management, and Deputy Dean of the UNSW Business School. This is the year that we introduced the Professorial Lectures. I can see from the audience that many of you have attended a number of these lectures. It's been a terrific initiative, I think. It gives the opportunity for those who are newly appointed professors at the university, or people who've been promoted to the rank of professor over the last year or so, to talk to their peers here at the university. I think this is about the 10th or the 11th in the series of lectures, and we've still got a significant series that we've got to go. I think it's somewhat astonishing that it's actually taken us this long to do it at this university. Many other universities have had this sort of a professorial inaugural lecture as part of their series. We are really very proud of our professoriate, and it is actually a terrific forum to have professors from all over the university. We've had professors from just about every one of the faculties now, many different disciplines address this forum. And it's not only successful because of the range of people that we get to hear, but also the fact that we get an opportunity to network with each other, I think, at these occasions as the event progresses. Now down to the business of this afternoon's lecture. Our speaker this afternoon, as I said, is Professor Julie Cogin. Julie joined the University of New South Wales in 2006. She's held a number of very important leadership roles here at the University of New South Wales. She was head of the School of Organisation and Management from 2010 to 2012 in the what was the Australian School of Business, which is now the UNSW Business School. She was head of the School of Strategy and Entrepreneurship in 2012. She received a university's Vice Chancellor's Award for Teaching in 2007, and she was promoted to Professor in 2014, and then appointed as Director of the AGSM later that year. Julie lists as amongst her research interests strategic human resource management and company performance. I guess that means how you configure your human resources to optimise company performances. Harassment and bullying in the workplace. And thirdly, international people management, managing people across international borders. Prior to taking up her academic career, Julie held various management positions, mainly in the human resource management area. She was Director of Human Resource Management at Qantas, and she practiced in many areas, including change management, mediation, and performance management. Look, without further ado, can I now call upon Professor Julie Cogin to deliver her lecture this afternoon, How Work-Life Support Programs Can Deliver to the Bottom Line.
So this is a really difficult gig, and it's not because I don't like public speaking. I can probably do some type of public address every second or third day as part of my job. This afternoon, though, is different. In a communication from our Vice-Chancellor, Ian Jacobs, to all of the inaugural professorial speakers, he asked that we share our personal story, the influence of family and friends and how that has shaped our life and influenced our work. And this is what's so difficult for me. I come from a 30-year background of working in corporates and business, and the values and the norms in that context is so counter to anything personal. I had 13 years at Qantas, and then I was consulting in banks in Australia and Singapore and Malaysia, and then 15 years at UNSW Business School. And particularly in my early stages, I learnt not to share the food with the family on the desk. I certainly used to sneak off to go to the swimming carnival and athletics carnival for the kids, and I'd disguise any morning sickness that I was suffering from. So, and anything but being emotional or personal at work. So this is why today there's a sense of vulnerability to being asked to share the personal story. So, sure.
Thank you. There's no But even with that vulnerability, I am a big believer and support personal growth. And I know that you don't have personal growth unless you take steps outside your comfort zone. So let's go. And here's the first photo that I can proudly display today. That was taken on Anzac Day about 18 years ago, and that's my daughter Kelly, who's just a few weeks old in that photo. The man is Frank Travers, and he was my grandfather, and he was, without doubt, the greatest man I've ever known. He was, for those of you who know anything about World War II, he was a rat of Tobruk, a prisoner of war, and he was a really successful business person. He lived the attributes that I find very dear: resilience, perseverance, and he had this generosity of spirit that I haven't seen in anyone else. So when he died, he donated his fortune to the charity to get kids off the street. And it wasn't just the generosity in that act, it was throughout his life. He was available to people from all walks and emotional and practical support. So he died in his mid-90s with still a bullet in his leg from the war, and he was driving the week before really badly around the eastern suburbs here. So he had a great influence on my mother, myself, and subsequently my two daughters. And he used to say to me that, as a woman, don't be constrained by your social context. And there are going to be limitations placed on you that you'll experience, but damn sure make sure that those limitations aren't self-imposed. He also used to encourage me every single day to find a chance where I could shine, where I could be the best person that I could be. And I also had an absolute obligation to create an environment where other people could shine as well. He built in me a desire to accept and also genuinely value differences in other people, as well as he cultivated this fascination of business and a love of a hard day's work. And some of my earliest memories as a child was spending part of every Sunday with my grandfather. And he used to get my brother and I to clean his bowling balls. And he used to play competitive bowls on the Saturday. And he gave us the choice. We could have pocket money for the chore or a lolly. Every week I chose the cash and would spend time influencing my brother to share his sweets with me. But over time, what he did, I don't know, it was 6 months or a year, we would together count up how much money I had saved, and he would equal that amount, and we'd buy shares. And then we would spend time over the years monitoring my minuscule amount of shares, but monitoring how they'd progress, or whether there was a downturn, and discuss all of those things about industry and management and so on. And it was very early in the 70s when I remember this excitement when my Grace brothers, 5 shares boomed. It was really exciting times. So I ended up in business, and I took a detour via science and found the light, and business was it for me. And went on to do a PhD and in harassment in the workplace. And that interest came from some consulting that I was doing in an insurance company at the time. It was an international insurance company. And they wanted to reduce deviant behaviour at work. And there was these rising levels of interpersonal mistreatment, incivility, bullying, harassment, you name it, they had it going. And I was astounded coming in that all of the resources were deployed in a reactionary way that dealt with harassment once it already occurred. So, for instance, they had a sophisticated grievance handling mechanism to deal with complaints. They had training for supervisors for what to do once, it had happened. And they also had some adequate levels of support for victims. And I thought, well, none of that prevents it, occurring. So I went on to study what heightens somebody's target vulnerability and aspects of the work group that were really important in prevention. Things like caretaker behaviours, things like supportive work practices, and leadership attributes. So at this time, I found myself firmly in the field of human resource management. And before you all go, ooh, it suffers from such an image problem, HR, right? Such an image. Is David Ward here? Oh, yeah, he is. Oh, David, hi. Okay, so this magazine came out 10 years ago, front cover in the US, Why We Hate HR, picture of a doll cutting the head off another doll. 10 years later, only last month, Harvard Business Review. It's time to blow up HR and build something new. And guess what? Throughout those 10 years, not that much has changed. We had Forbes, it's time to fire our HR departments. We've had The Australian under a photo of a great white shark that everyone hates HR. So maybe the image problem comes from the publicity, but if we're really going to be honest here, I won't have a job tomorrow, so that's okay. It's also because of our daily experiences dealing with HR people and HR departments that could be focused on the operational issues, the filling in the form, and the basics of hiring and firing that prevents us from doing what we want to do as a leader. But I'm also going to let you in on a secret. HR people feel your frustration. And what they want to be doing is they want to be at the table, devising strategy, driving it, leading it, and executing strategy. So my research is all about what are the impediments to get HR to that level. So what are the ways that HR can operate as a genuine business partner? So the conditions where HR can help an organisation deliver its fundamental objective. Now for me, it doesn't matter if that fundamental objective is working with a multinational and it's about shareholder value or profit, or if it's about working with a hospital. I have an ARC linkage grant in healthcare management, and that hospital's fundamental objective is to reduce errors or readmissions of patients or fatalities due to human error. So it doesn't matter to me. So that's what I'm interested in. So I want to do a little experiment with people here today. Most of you in the front 15 odd rows have got clickers that look like this. Have you got your clicker? Okay, pick up your clicker, and as I said, HR, the objective is to partner with the business. So I was involved in some contract research with GE a number of years ago now, and they asked business leaders over multiple countries, different time periods, different industries, what is the biggest challenge to their success and growth? So I'd like you to have a look at the question and pick the answer that you think most business leaders feel. So we're up past 30. Okay, when we get to 100, I'll turn it off. Okay. So I'm going to count down, 3, 2, 1. Let's see what you guys, what you think. Access to talent. Right on. Right on. And so to me, this means that it doesn't matter how distinctive, how novel your strategy is. If you haven't got the right people to implement it, it's meaningless. And so talent management is over and over being cited as a key challenge for successful businesses. And guess what? We've got a really poor track record with this. And when I'm talking about talent management, I'm talking about acquiring the right people, engaging and retaining them when you've got them. Now, I must say, let me reframe that slightly. We're doing better now at attracting talent. We're still doing poorly with retention. And if you think about UNSW and Les's great SPFO 1 scheme about bringing in scholars of rock star status to UNSW, or even our SPFO 3 funding. That's another method with talent management of bringing in the rising stars. But we need to reflect of what we should be doing better around when we've got good people, what are we doing to engage them and keep them? So with your clickers, let's go on to the next experiment. Now this comes to some research from Gallup. And Gallup, over many, many years, look at why do people quit organisations. These are the top 8 reasons people cite, from middle management level and below. Why do people quit? I'd like you to answer it from your behalf. Why would you quit your job? What would be the number one reason? Probably a combination of all of them, but what do you think would be the main reason? We're getting, we should be collecting data and writing up research, Les, shouldn't we? Okay, so we're over 100. Let's click this off. What do you think the answer is? Bored and unchallenged by the work, concerns about job security, conflict with colleagues and bosses. The number one reason people cite is conflict with colleagues and the boss is the number one reason. And that's been number one for a number of years now. Number 2 is workload and job hours. That's number 2. What's interesting with this data is that 5 years ago, that one about workload wasn't even in the top 10. So it's becoming more and more relevant recently. So on this very point, work-life support practices are a tool that organisations can put in place to attract people to their organisation and to keep them once they're there. They can be more engaged. So here's work-life support practices as a definition, but it includes a whole lot of different things. Initiatives. So it can be flexible time, it can be job share, it can be working from home, working remotely, a whole lot of different things. And we shouldn't be constrained by just that list. Work-life support practices, though, are not just a tool to address talent management issues, but are also necessary to address our changing demographic at work. So let's have a look at that for a moment. No one would really be surprised that women are about 46% of the workforce. This has remained stable for a number of years. What is changing is that men, this is all in Australia, this data, men are now 17% occupying part-time roles and fractional appointments. And the number of stay-at-home dads has tripled in the last 3 years, though from a very low base. But the point I want to make is that work-life support practices are not just an initiative for working mums. This isn't an initiative for all people who have responsibilities outside work or have interests outside work. Let's look at changing households then. So households in Australia have changed. We now have around about 17% of households have a single parent. And that could be because of the divorce rate, or it could be through choice, that's what you want to do as a parent. Look at the number of 2 parents in full-time work, 65%, both parents are working full-time. And let's look at what's our ageing population saying. Now we've got, by the year 2020, and John Pigott and folks at CEPA can speak much more intelligently about this than me, but what I do know is that we're predicting in Australia that we're going to have 4 million people aged 75 or above. We're going to have more 65-year-olds than 1-year-olds. This means we're going to have workplaces with lots of responsibilities for caring outside just the work. So work-life support practices can address that. They can also help us access underutilised talent. Now remember, talent was the key, challenge for business leaders. There's all this unutilised or unfulfilled talent that we can look at. In 2012, I published a paper on work values across the multi-generational workplace. And what was interesting there is Generation Y. Generation Y, the bane of some of our life. So people in their young 20s, they certainly are not defined by their work. Work is just one part of what they do. But what they're motivated by is the opportunity to take gap leave. They want to go back to school at UNSW. They want to go travel. They also want the opportunity to go for a surf at 2 in the afternoon and maybe work till 10. What was interesting in the research, when you look at the older workers that we call traditionalists, the older workers were much more defined by work and identity was anchored around work, but they're also looking at other options rather than retirement. They're looking for these flexible time work hours, they're looking for gap leave, and increasingly older workers are assuming care responsibilities of their grandchildren. So it was certainly a pattern that I found in the work. And the literature has moved on. So it used to be called work-family literature, and now it's work-life, in recognition that it's just not about childcare, it's about a whole lot of other things. So we got into the research, and I'd like to, now we're talking about the research, Karen Sanders. Karen, please put your hand up. My good friend, head of school, School of Management, co-author, as well as Ian Williamson from Melbourne. So Karen and I and Ian started getting into the research, and we were pretty disappointed with what there was. So there was this prevalence of research on initiatives and policy, and not usage or take-up of initiatives. And so what I found from my own experiences was that having the initiatives did not account for the organisational culture that prevented me using it. And I had examples when I tried to access, these types of practices that I found I faced judgment and evaluation, and my commitment to the team and to the organisation was questioned. So in our research, we really wanted to look at the context which within work-life support practices were implemented. It was really important. We also found that there was this abundance of research at the individual level of analysis. So that meant that all scholars that were looking at outcomes were concerned with things like job satisfaction, emotions such as happiness, and so on. Now, I'm at risk here of really upsetting my organisational psychologist colleagues, and I can see a few in the room, but I thought this was a gap in knowledge, because if an organisation perceived work-life support practices to be a financial burden, guess what was going to get cut when times got tough? They didn't care how happy or satisfied people are at work. That didn't mean that you were going to exert discretionary effort and work harder for the organisation. So we wanted to establish the business case. What's the business case for demonstrating causality for work-life support practices to the bottom line of an organisation? And that would ensure that there was a sustainable investment over time. And so we went about doing that, and we hadn't found any other research that had done that in the past. So this was sort of our model, The firm performance, we started off being interested in net profit and customer service. And I got access and started building a database across 27 countries and through industry links at AGSM and other places. And I had this opportunity that was very challenging at the time to present early data from the research at Northeastern University in Boston and at their business school. And unfortunately, I had a room full of economists and accountants, or fortunately, however you look at it. And I was so excited by the data that we had. And I was showing the contributions to the bottom line and, you know, all the rest of it, and they could not be convinced. And they said to me, Julie, the performance of the firm, that may be due. You've got an effective manager and they're coaching and they're delivering really good feedback. And that's how you can explain performance. Or it could be that that employee has been on one of AGSM's executive education programs, which are great, and that training explains the performance. You know, or it could be pay. But the economists love this. It was about bonuses, pay, above market remuneration, and that's why the firm was performing really well. So we went away, as despondent as I was at the time, and we made sure that we controlled and isolated for a range of different effects. So we controlled for the whole HR system, which accounted for those things that I've just explained, and we also controlled for prior performance, because it could be that the firms that we looked at were successful previously and that explained the current success. Or it could be that it was a really big organisation and they had, you know, fat to invest in these initiatives. Could be the managers were HR experienced. We looked at gross domestic product because it was across 27 countries. So we did all of that. And we found some really, really promising results. First of all, we found that an increase in work-life support practices, 1 unit, resulted in 13% extra to customer satisfaction and an 18% increase in net profit. And our explanations from this is that work-life support practices demonstrated goodwill by the organisation and the building of a psychological contract where the employee, it engendered in the employee a perception that the organisation cared for them and their personal well-being and valued their contribution. And this in turn created a felt obligation, and this felt obligation where the employee wanted to reciprocate and adopt the right attitudes and behaviours that were beneficial to the organisation. So that was our explanation of the results. But any good management scholar knows that will never get published because it's a direct effect, right? Organisations are much more complicated and humans are complicated, and there's a whole lot of other things that can explain what we found. And I come back to my own experience is about, you know, there were a lot of reasons why I didn't take up initiatives. So what we did is we wanted to look at what could be the other explanations. And I want to tell you a bit of a story, so a bit of a sidebar story, reflecting back to my days at Qantas. And I was there in the 80s, and that was a public service organisation at that time. It was a transport company. And at Qantas, our job was to transport you from A to B. We did it safely, you know, good job. We had this new CEO, a guy called John Menendew. And he came in and he said, I want to change the culture of this place to be a service business and transport business. And so he said to his assistant early in his days, he had to go to London with talks for British Airways. And he said, you know, she came in and she said, Mr. Menendew, here's your boarding pass. This was the day before his flight. Here's your boarding pass. You're in 1A. And we've blocked off 1B, so no passenger, no riffraff can bother you about their problems with Qantas and so on. And he said, you know what? No, I want to be down the back. I want to be in economy, cattle class for us at the airline, and I want to talk to the passengers and the ground staff and all the rest of it about their experience with Qantas. And she said, no, Mr. Menju, for the rest of your life, you get to fly first class with Qantas. He said, put me down the back. So in those days, you've got to remember, the way that you communicated was an internal memo through the mail. That's what we did in those days. And it was amazing what they did. A 747-200 was grounded. And they took out 4 seats from economy. You know where the aircraft curves at the back? So they could take out 4 seats without blocking people's view to the movie. Remember the movie at the front of the... Some of you are a lot younger than me. And they took that out and they planted a first class seat in there. And they built this pod. This big curtain. This is a true story. They built this curtain around. Now, in those days, that was smoking. You remember the haze? You'd walk down. It was smoking on an aircraft. People would stand at the back and have drinks and cigarettes at the door. He was a non-smoker. So they managed to even build a portable air conditioning unit in that pod and work out ways that he could have the cutlery and the silverware without the plastic garbage everyone else had. So he walked onto the plane and he saw that and he went, no way, put me here. You know, the middle, at the back of the plane. No one could believe it. And he sat there and he went to and from London. In those days, it was London. You had to go Singapore, Bahrain, London. And every time he flew, he was in economy, talking to everyone. And, you know, it was amazing. By the time that plane landed in Singapore, every single of the 30,000 employees at Qantas knew about that story. He was able to send a message that penetrated all of these levels just with his actions. And when you flew with Mr. Menju and you got on that plane and he went right down to the back, you didn't go left. It started making a really big difference in the organisation. And so this story, bringing it back to my research, I thought we've got to look at tone at the top. And so coming back to upper echelon perspective is the name of the theory, and sort of Don Hamrick is really big in this area. And he says, and I think that he's so right, if you want to explain why organisations do the things that they do, let's look at the leadership team. So, or Confucius will say, the fish rots at the head. Same thing, right? Don just says it much more eloquently. And so it was Karen's idea, actually, to look at some of the values of the top leadership team and to look at the composition of the team. And so we, in this research, we measured a range of values of the top teams, and this could be a group of up to 8 people, and then we aggregated the values to get a measure of the work group climate. And we did all the right things around inter-rater reliabilities and all the statistical tests, you can be assured of that. And then we knew what the tone of the top was. So one of the values that we did look at was the value of masculinity. And masculinity is not about men or women, it's about a value and an orientation that you have. So it includes things like, for a high masculine work culture, a competitiveness, a psyche around winning, forcefulness, assertiveness, self-reliance. That's a highly masculine work group. So that we looked at that, and our hypothesis was, if you had a top teams with those values, then you're not going to get the effects for work-life support practices. Because irrespective of whether you've got them, people aren't going to take them up without that sort of judgment and evaluation, questions of commitment that I certainly face. So we went on to do this and we had very good results as expected. We found that there was even stronger outcome to performance when you had a lower proportion of masculinity in that top team. We also found that more diversity there was in that top team in terms of women, in terms of people with children, the results further strengthened. And our finding around and our ideas around this second notion around diversity, we thought that if leaders of these top teams had experience juggling work and life, then they might be more empathetic and more focus on implementing this in their own workplaces. So we were really pleased with that. We then went on to think, well, there's more to it. We've got this 27 country sample that we'd been working on, and if you think about some of the assumptions of work-life support practices, they are deep-seated in sort of a Western orientation. Like they come from Western nations where we have a strong value, certainly in Australia, around individualism, around gender equity. And we wanted to know, well, what happens in countries without those same values that we have in Australia? The non-Western countries that think differently and behave differently than we do. So we thought, well, let's have a look at national culture and how does that then impact the relationship. These are the countries that we studied. And there's not 27 countries there because we didn't have enough results and we had to come up with an other category. But we had some really cool countries that we looked at, things like Turkey, Egypt, India, Denmark, Brazil, as well as the usual, US, Singapore, Australia, and Canada, and so on. So we thought, this it's interesting. Let's see what we find. And as expected, we found that in these countries, which have a high regard for gender equity, the results were even further strengthened. So if you have a leadership team that is low masculine in their orientation, and you're in a country that there's high values and practices around gender equity, well, even better result for organisations. And as expected, in other countries where there is not that value, then we had no effects. We didn't have negative effects, we had no effects. So if you had the work-life practices, it wasn't a bad thing, but it certainly wasn't benefiting. And our explanation was that maybe in these countries, it wasn't of value to employees or it wasn't needed. So it wasn't a way that the organisation could demonstrate goodwill and build that reciprocity in their staff. What's the question? Then there's a question. What about a three-way interaction? What happens when you're in a country, say, with low gender equity, but you've got a top leadership team with all of the values that are aligned with work life? So what is the higher order? Does leadership trump national culture? So pick up your clickers and have a go. What do you think? So do the leadership values mitigate? Karen, you're not allowed to answer on yours. Does it mitigate the cultural values? What do you think? What's sort of more important? So this was really, for us, it was interesting to study because what we could do is we could start to look at the transportability of a Western sort of management discretionary practice in other countries. So we're over 127. So let's have a look at it. Yes, you're right. Leadership trumped the national culture. So in terms of our three-way interaction, we found that if you were in a country like Egypt, like India and so on, which has different values and practices on gender equity as what we had, if you had the right leadership team, we could make the business case to the bottom line from these, though it was lower than other countries. So this was really quite interesting to us. And so I want to start to sum up some of the findings. We've really just given you a snapshot of the research to date. But what we did find with all of these controls and so on, that we did lose the net profit direct effect. So customer satisfaction was the main outcome, but customer satisfaction was highly correlated with net profit. So this is the sort of path diagram that we found. So the findings, work-life support practices, yes, it's definitely worth investing them, though the outcomes are shaped by the context in which they're delivered. The leadership team is so important. The leadership team can value an employee and value that how important it is to manage work and non-work responsibilities. My comments to business is that work-life support practices can give you a competitive advantage, a sustainable competitive advantage, because they can help you attract talent and they can help you retain and engage talent. And it's also very difficult to replicate and copy, because it's not just about pulling out the initiatives and the different practices. You've got to place them in a context and a leadership team where you're going to get the superior results. So at the beginning of the lecture, I said to you and shared with you the story of my grandfather and how he's been such an influence on my life. And I suppose one of the aims of this research is so that my daughters, certainly if they want to access work-life support practices, if they choose to, that they get the chance to, so we've made the business case, and that they don't face that judgment and their commitment being questioned by organisations. So I'm going to finish with photos of numbers of years of my beautiful daughters. Thank you very much. We don't normally do questions, but I've just been given the heads up by David and Les that we can take a couple of questions today. If there are. Yes?
Do you think that it varies within countries? So say if you're working from by country and by industry,
Yeah.
you can control by industry. So if you're working for
Yeah.
a mining company in WA,
Yeah.
is that different than working for an insurance company in Australia?
Yes, absolutely. We did control for industry, but yeah, it is. And it's coming back to the cultural values and the norms and the leadership teams and so on. If you look at a country like India, if you look at countries like China, they're like 30 different countries in one. So yeah, that's a very good point. I do think there's a difference. Yes, Claudia.
Aspirational work-life balance environment in Australia, would you have any tips for people progressing their career?
Tips for people, yes. I've been really fortunate at UNSW to have access to some remarkable mentors, formal mentors and coaches and informal ones. I know when I first was here at UNSW, Lex Donaldson was a mentor, Roger Simnett was a mentor, and I, through the AWOL program, had Richard Henry. And there was also informal mentors over the years. Wai Fong Chua, Prem Rambrith was another one, and so many inspirational people that, I've watched their leadership and, been inspired by Chris Adam, Mark Uncles, and, a number of people around the room. So my advice was, when you get access to great people like that, extract the value you can. Don't waste their time or yours. Go and be prepared. Be prepared for those meetings and, soak it up and, build the relationship. So, yeah, get some mentors and coaches. And UNSW does such a wonderful job providing that sort of support for all people. So, one more question? Yes.
With the ageing population that we know of that you flagged, do you think that will change dramatically the caring obligations for both men and women?
Absolutely. It already is. It already is. My beautiful daughters, I'm just getting them out of home now and I'm looking after the parents, So it's already changing, and I think that the stresses on people who have got carer responsibilities under and above and across, it's already proving a strain on people. So I might hand over to David at this point.
So Deputy Vice-Chancellor, friends and colleagues of the Business School and of UNSW, thanks for coming today and listening into Julie's inaugural address. Today I have the honour and the privilege of providing a vote of thanks to Julie in respect of the address she's just given, and as a close friend and colleague of Julie's, I'm delighted to be given the opportunity to do so. And what a terrific address it was. It demonstrated her passion for her research and her teaching. And I'd just like to reflect for a few moments on what we've heard. I'd like to start by observing that Julie's address actually reinforces some of the data that's been contained in recent OECD How's Life reports. For those of you that don't know, that's a report that comes out regularly, and I think it assesses the quality of life in 35 developed countries. And overall, what it does, the good news, is that it confirms that Australia, for the majority of its population, is actually a great place to live. We come out pretty well on a range of measures and dimensions, including housing, civic engagement, personal security, subjective well-being, social connections, and income and wealth. In fact, we come out above average on all dimensions except one, and the one that we don't rate particularly well on is work-life balance. And on this dimension, we languish in the bottom 20% of countries assessed, in fact. And Julie's talk so eloquently reminds us that this is indeed a significant issue and problem, if you like, in Australia. It's a little bit of a blemish on our society and economic well-being. And it was a talk that shows the seriousness of the issue of work-life balance in terms of how it affects Australian workers and how it affects Australian business and other organisations. And it reminds us that the cost of poor work-life balance is high for both the employee and the employer. And yet, as I think Julie has shown, this isn't a problem that regularly features, I suspect, as part of the nation's psyche. Employees themselves tend to have limited mechanisms by which to actually voice their concerns about this issue. In fact, in some workplaces, there is a fear of doing so, a fear of being seen to be in some way unable to cope with your job and of focusing on something that, if addressed, might be at the expense, in fact, of productivity and performance. And at the same time, business, government and a range of other employing sectors have a tendency to deny or ignore the significance of work-life balance. And as Julie points out, even in those organisations that have policies in place that are designed to address this issue, actually they often seem unable to operationalise them, if you like. And they do so, or they face this challenge and are unable to address it at their peril. As Julie's talk has shown, pressures on employers stemming from increased connectivity, increased competition and highly volatile markets, the ongoing demand for change in work and organisation that all that creates, actually only serves to intensify tensions, if you like, in the work-life balance that she's highlighted, and that's bad for the organisation as much as it's bad for the employee. Now, there's not much point in reflecting on a problem if there's no proposed solution. And that's what's so important and pleasing about Julie's talk and about so much of what she does in her research and scholarship. And she's used it to suggest a change of mindset and perhaps a change of approach to tackling this issue. It's an approach that, for example, might require us to think about and reflect on leadership practice, national culture and so on as core influences on the ability of organisations to implement effective work-life programmes. In causing us to reflect on that, she's advocated something, I think, that's reminiscent, and it's at the core of much of Julie's work. It's reminiscent of the approach, if you like, or the mantra adopted by Herb Kelleher, the highly successful former CEO of Southwestern Airlines in the US. Some of you may recall that Kelleher was renowned for reminding anyone that would listen to him, and also those that wouldn't listen to him, that the business of business is people, and that organisations should position this right at the centre of their business model. And that's what's at the heart, I think, of Julie and the co-authors' call to action. She's provided a compelling business as well as, if you like, socially responsible case as to how an organisation can benefit from a work-life balance programme. In other words, how those programmes can provide a positive return on investment and affect the bottom line, and she's shown a way forward on that. My final thought about Julie's talk relates to, in fact, UNSW 2025, our new strategic plan. One of the driving rationales behind it is that great universities like UNSW and the people in them should be about making a difference to people's lives. And here in her talk, we have an example where Julie's thought leadership could be used to make a positive difference to people's lives and the organisations they work in. So, as I intimated a moment ago, we might want to see Julie's talk as a rallying call for organisations to see their work-life balance programmes really as a benefit and not a drawback. And those in leadership roles can use the talk as a starting point for considering how programmes, work-life programmes, might become integral, strategically integral to their overall business and be better integrated into the everyday activities of the organisation. And now I'd just like to conclude by reflecting on a little-known fact about Julie. It is the case that from an early age, she always wanted to be an astronaut. So much so that she applied to join the Australian Air Force as a fighter pilot. The first year, I think, that women were allowed to apply for such a role. And knowing Julie, I can imagine she'd have been first in the queue. Unfortunately, she wasn't successful in what I'm sure would have been a highly competitive and demanding assessment process, so she wasn't able to secure that cherished place on the training programme. Following that, though, she decided that another route into space via science might work, so she commenced studying physics, I think it was, at the undergraduate level. It wasn't long, however, before she actually decided that studying business was a better fit. And I note, of course, that she still, through business, managed to find a way to get close up to planes. 13 years, was it, at Qantas? So that's a tribute to your tenacity. But it does seem to me that the space industry's loss, if you like, was our gain. We're delighted, actually, that Julie chose to pursue a career in business and ultimately in business education. And as the Deputy Vice-Chancellor's introduction of Julie demonstrated, it's been a stunningly successful career. That switch to the study and practice of business is why we're able to come together today and celebrate and acknowledge Julie's tremendous achievements as a research scholar, a teacher and an academic leader. So Julie, on behalf of all the colleagues and friends gathered here today, and on behalf of the Business School here at UNSW, I thank you for your thought-provoking and insightful inaugural address. It's captured, as I said, your passion about and commitment to addressing this important issue, and it's epitomised the scholarship, the professionalism and the thought leadership you've demonstrated throughout your career. And most of all, Julie, we congratulate you again on your appointment as Professor. It's richly deserved. So please join me in acknowledging Julie.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you very much, Julie, for a fantastic lecture and another great lecture in this series. It astounds me. It doesn't astound me. We are proud of the diversity of scholarship that goes on across this university, and this series of professorial lectures has really just allowed us to hear some of the excellent scholars that we have at the University of New South Wales. Look, before we finish, there are 2 or 3 things that I need to just announce and catch up on. Firstly, I'm sure Julie wants every one of you who has one of these little thingies here to leave it behind. I don't know what the attrition rate is as you use these in your teaching classes, but I'm sure that they're valuable. So make sure you do leave them behind. The second thing is that we will have drinks and nibbles out in the foyer immediately after this lecture closes. I said at the beginning, I think one of the really important things that we do at this university is to use these opportunities to network with each other. And I've found that these occasions just to mix briefly after a lecture like this one have been, I won't say as valuable as the lecture, but they've been a very integral part of what we get out of the inaugural lectures. Third thing that I wanted to say was the next lecture in this series will be given on the 22nd of September, so about 3 weeks' time. It'll be given by Professor Guy Marks. He's from the Faculty of Medicine. He's based out at the Liverpool precinct, I think. And he's a respiratory medico, researcher in respiratory medicine. And his title is Breathe Easy, Research for Global Lung Health. So that is the next one in this series, and I would really like it if you put it into your calendars for the 22nd. And look, with that, let me just close again by really offering a vote of thanks to Julie Cogin for a fantastic lecture here this afternoon.